Hello. This week we're talking about the 1968 Patrick Troughton Doctor Who serial, The Dominators. I hate The Dominators. You may know this already, but just so there's no mistaking, I hate The Dominators so much that I'm not even going to review it properly. I reviewed it for real on Regards Doctor Who in 1994, and I'm still angry that I even had to watch this story back then in order to review it. I originally reviewed the novelization on the Ratings Guide 10 years ago, and I'm still angry that I even like the novelization. I have tried every possible way that there is to like the Dominators. I've tried watching it in the morning. I have tried watching it at night. I have tried watching it drunk. I've tried watching it sober. I have tried watching it with friends. I have tried watching it alone. I tried watching it while playing erotic capture the flag with identical twin Victoria's Secret models. No, I haven't. But I bet that wouldn't help either. I have tried watching it with the sound off while listening to an audio copy of City of Death. It hasn't helped. So here are, with apologies to Julia Stiles, and I suppose William Shakespeare, 10 things I hate about you. I hate that if I live another 49 years, I will never write anything as funny as Bill Evenson's review of this thing for the first Outside In volume. I hate that I can't even sell my DVD of this story because the Scottish falsetto sock puppet theater Easter egg hidden on the special features menu is so funny that I can't bear to live my life without it. I hate that the credited writer, Norman Ashby, is not even a real person, so that I can't friend him on Facebook and post GIFs of the worst moments of the story on his wall on a daily basis. I hate that Patrick Troughton does not get a word of dialogue until more than 5 minutes into episode 5. He's literally the best thing about the final episode, and he's hardly even in it. I hate that I've actually watched this story a dozen times over 30 years, and I still don't know which one is Kando and which one is Teal. I hate that Ian Marter made the novelization so good, because the episode is so bad that it bothers me that I actually enjoy anything that came out of it. I hate that I'm curious as to how much worse this could have been had the 6th episode not been cut out. Can't for the life of me figure out how another 25 minutes of drama could have been extended out of this repetitive soporific mess. I hate that the stock footage of the volcano used at the end of episode 5 was also seen in Enemy of the World and Inferno, because it's not fair that two of classic Doctor Who's finest hours have to share footage with this festering waste of celluloid. I hate that I once complained that Peter Ling's novelization of The Mind Robber cuts out the continuity to this story because it messed with screen accuracy. I mean, the fact that the author of the brilliant Mind Robber pretended the story never even happened, and I didn't just accept that gift to continuity, like manna from heaven. And I hate that I'm still complaining about this story 29 years after I first wrote a review of it. Can't I find anything better to do with my life?
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the Doctor Who novelizations put out by Target Books from 1973 onward in publication order. We're a member of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. Last week, episode 85, my daughter joined me as a special guest for Enlightenment. It was her very first classic Doctor Who serial in full, and her very first novelization in full. She had, of course, one of the best first day download numbers that I've ever had, and the episode certainly performed well above average over the first week, thanks to each and every one of you who downloaded or who spread the word. Callie is very, very pleased with herself and wants to come back. I do have to make a correction, though, as I almost always do whenever a new James Couré Smith Substack comes out, Psychic Paper. He always seems to time his essays to correct some point that I made that I got from received wisdom, which turns out to have been received incorrectly. I told Callie last week that after Enlightenment in 1983, the next Doctor Who story written solely by the female author came in 1989 with Survival. Now, the 1985 story, Attack of the Cybermen, is credited to Paula Moore, but received wisdom is that Paula Moore had nothing to do with the writing of that story, with the credit going to either Eric Sayward or, depending on how charitable you feel, Ian Levine. James Courret Smith, however, does not just sit on conventional wisdom. He did the research, he dug pretty deep, and he has come to some interesting conclusions about the true authorship of at least the very first episode of Attack of the Cybermen. So next time Callie is on the show, should that happen, I will certainly talk to her about Attack of the Cybermen. In other Doctor Who news, a couple of big media releases were announced this past week, early August 2023, following the adaptation of Doctor Who in An Exciting Adventure with the Daleks, the 1964 David Whittaker book, turned into a gorgeous illustrated hardcover illustrated by Robert Hack. We are getting a second illustrated hardcover of a Doctor Who novelization, again by Robert Hack. This, however, is the new series novelization Rose by Russell T Davies. Also coming out, a fully animated color version of The Underwater Menace. Now, there was a release in 2015 of The Underwater Menace on DVD with restored versions of the two surviving episodes, episodes 2 and 3, and with basic telesnap reconstructions of episodes 1 and 4. But we are now getting the deluxe animated version, and this is after BBC America stopped co-funding the animations last year following the release of The Abominable Snowmen. We are getting a 4-part color 16:9 animated version of the story, including animations of the two surviving episodes. This will be a deluxe edition, though, that of course includes the original versions of the story and will also feature a bunch of bonus features. While I don't have Underwater Menace in my top 5 Patrick Troughton serials, I think it is an underrated story which has some very interesting features to it, and I think it is deserving a fresh look and a fair look. I know when I joined internet fandom in the early 1990s, somebody on Recart's Doctor Who described it as the Plan 9 from outer space of Doctor Who. At the time, all that survived were nth generation copies of episode 3. It was mistakenly believed the production values were so poor that you could actually hear talkback from a production assistant in studio right after the opening credits. That, of course, turned out to be an incorrect fact. What we were hearing was the cliffhanger dialogue to episode 2. Now, Underwater Menace might not necessarily work. When Nigel Robinson did the novelization towards the end of the original Target run, he substantially restructured the ending, and I think he improves the story significantly by doing that. But there's a lot to like about Underwater Menace. There is Patrick Troughton's chaotic early version of the Second Doctor. There is Joseph First's justly famous performance as Professor Zaroff. And there are some interesting subplots in there as well, one of which rivals a moment from The Curse of Fenric. And there I am, probably the first person ever to compare Underwater Menace to The Curse of Fenric, but I said it. And when that DVD comes out, I'll be discussing it over on Trap 1, and I'll make my point in full there. And again, when the Underwater Menace novelization comes up on this show, which is going to be at least a year from now, so please make sure to subscribe, get new episodes pushed to your phone or listening device, and tune in when I discuss the Underwater Menace many, many, many months from now. But in the meantime, it is 1984. It is Target book number 86, and it is a new phase for the Target line, following 10 straight published novelizations of Peter Davison stories. We're going back to the beginning, and Target from now on is going to regularly fill in holes in its back catalog by novelizing for the first time William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, and John Pertwee stories that were not adapted in the 1970s or the very early 80s. From now on, we will regularly go back and forth along Doctor Who's timeline from the 60s to the 80s to the 70s to the 60s to the 80s to the 60s. The first of these, and I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, is the novelization of The Dominators. That's right, this is the first novelization of an old-time story that Target has put out in quite some time, as we sit here in 1984, and it is a story that is perennially ranked very low on any wide-ranging survey of Doctor Who Classic Series stories. The great thing about the Target novelizations is that it gives us a fresh look at a less than universally beloved story and causes us to reevaluate that story. If I'm talking about the Dominators, there can only be one guest who's going to join me to go 15 rounds, and that, of course, is the foremost defender of the Dominators on Twitter, longtime friend of the show, and he's been on the show many times before, Mr. Frazer Gregory. Coming up after the break, Frazer and I will debate the Dominators. There can only be one winner. Let's get to it.
The Vervoids are probably the best dirty joke in Doctor Who.
They're hermaphroditic plants.
A lot of plants are.
So there you go. It's based on science.
No, they'll ship anything.
There are probably 11 and handle shippers out there. You just have to drill a hole where his mouth is, and you're all set.
You know he needs the room. I've seen it in pictures.
I'm not saying you're not a fan. I'm saying you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Doctor Who gives a drunken Doctor Who podcast for the end times. You are listening to Doctor Who literature. Keep turning the pages!
My name is Stacey Smith. I am, among other things, the editor of the Outside In series. I am a frequent guest on this podcast, and I am the co-author of Look at the Size of That Thing, a comedy guide to the wonderful world of Doctor Who fandom, which is co-written with Bill Evenson. Bill, I got to know because he wrote an entry for Outside In on the Dominators. Later, we decided to co-write a comedy book together. Here is my entry for that, in a section that we call the 50 Doctor Who stories you'd rather die before you watch. Here's how bad this story is. The single best thing about it, far and away, by any metric you care to use, is the faux review of it by my co-author in the original Outside In, which was so funny that one of the other contributors reported that, after reading it, his wife banned him from reading in bed. So it was either funny or very, very sexy. Indeed, that piece was so good that while I had to write or edit 20 books before I could get a look in for the comedy book I've been wanting to write for decades, that review was Bill's entire audition piece to get this gig. So either that review was incredibly good or the Dominators was unbelievably bad. You be the judge. The contributor to Outside In, whose wife banned him from reading in bed as a result of that review, was, of course, Jason Miller. You heard it here first.
Joining me now for what is probably the most anticipated segment in the entire history of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. We have been building up to this for months, literally years. Every time I mention my true feelings on the TV serial, The Dominators, Frazer will reply on Twitter. I've started saying, "Hello, Frazer," every time I mention The Dominators on this show. And here he is, after all this time, ready to go 15 rounds in a heavyweight title fight discussing Doctor Who and the Dominators. My special guest of the week, Mr. Frazer Gregory. Frazer, welcome to the show.
Command accepted, Jason.
And I noticed that your Zencaster screen name is set to Navigator Frazer.
Well, I couldn't be the probationer on this one, could I?
You are not the probationer when it comes to this story. Frazer, we're going to shake it up a little bit. We're going to start off by playing our game first.
Ooh.
For an episode like this, it is not enough to merely play 20 questions. It is not enough to play Guess That Cliffhanger. We're going to play a new game this week that has never been seen on Doctor Who literature before. We're going to be playing a game of Would You Rather.
Right.
I will give you 10 items.
Mm-hmm.
The winning score is 7. Question 1. Would you rather ... watch Ronald Allen in The Ambassadors of Death or Ronald Allen in The Dominators?
Oh, blimey. Ronald Allen in The Dominators. I think he's a great Ralph Cornish, but he has something extra in The Dominators that he's just got that sort of cadaverous Frankenstein-esque feel about him that really towers over The Dominators.
Interesting. So that's 1 for The Dominators and 0 for Common Sense and Good Taste. Let's move on to question 2. Would you rather ... watch Arthur Cox in The 11th Hour or Arthur Cox in The Dominators?
Well, obviously The Dominators, because he gets very little to do in The 11th Hour other than get his car keys stolen by Ian Bond. Whereas in The Dominators, he gets to do the full Bruce Willis and go around, tipping rocks onto Quarks and throwing canisters of explosives at them and just generally being the all-out action hero that he was born to be.
You make The Dominators sound very exciting when you talk about Arthur Cox as the Bruce Willis of Dulcus.
Yeah, he is.
So right now the score is Dominators 2, Good Taste 0. And remember, the winning score is 7. Question 3. Would you rather ... watch Malcolm Terrace in The Horns of Nymon or Malcolm Terrace in The Dominators?
I can't remember who he plays in The Horns of Nymon, so I'll just say The Dominators.
All right, I'll rephrase the question then. Would you rather ... watch Malcolm Terrace as the co-pilot in The Horns of Nymon or Malcolm Terrace in his 2 scenes in The Dominators?
Yeah, obviously the 2 scenes in The Dominators.
Interesting, because his performance as the co-pilot in parts 1 and 2 of Horns of Nymon is one of Doctor Who's most memorable short guest appearances, because at no point in The Dominators does he shout, "Weakling scum!"
Weakling scum!
No, but he's not up against the single greatest guest performance of any, Doctor Who supporting actor in Graham Crowden's Soldeed.
Lord Nymon! Lord Nymon! It is I, Soldeed.
I think you're right about Graham Crowden, but I thought you were going to say going up against the greatest guest star of all time, Ronald Allen and The Dominators. Though they do not share any screen time together because Malcolm Terrace is killed off very early on in the proceedings. Question 4. Would you rather watch The War Games or The Dominators?
Oh, The Dominators, because I can fit that in an afternoon.
That's a fair point. I should have chosen a shorter classic Troughton episode, but the question is the question. Dominators are up 4-0. Question 5. Would you rather watch Pyramids of Mars or The Dominators?
Probably The Dominators. I think, Pyramids of Mars is great fun and all, but, it hasn't got quarks, has it? It's got mummies, and...
That's exactly why everybody should vote Pyramids of Mars, because mummies would clearly defeat quarks.
Well, I don't think they would. I think the quarks have probably got not much in it, but they've probably got more speed and agility on the mummies, and they've also got projectile weapons. So by the time the mummy comes anywhere close to squishing a quark between its chest, between its bosom, the quark has shot it down.
But the mummies are immune to bullets because they are robots wrapped in specially preserved bandages. So I would give my vote to the mummies in that matchup. But you going with the Dominators?
The Quarks don't fire bullets, though. They fire ultrasonic rays, which would just dissolve the mummy and their wrappings.
I think Sutek's technology was a little stronger than the Dominators. So maybe the mummies' gauze bandages are specifically designed to withstand the Dominators' death rays.
Well, the hand of Sutek might assist him somehow, but
All right, question 6. Would you rather watch The Day of the Doctor, which was number 1 of all time in the 2014 DWM Doctor Who survey, or The Dominators, which was a little bit below number 1? Maybe a couple of hundred spaces below.
Yeah, I don't know if you've noticed the publication error with the latest DWM poll, where they printed it upside down and they had the Dominators bottom when it should really be in the top. I have addressed that with DWM. I'm just waiting for a reprint and an apology for that error. It'll come in a couple of months, don't worry. I'm going to say the Dominators again.
Huh. So you would take the 227th or whatever it was greatest episode of all time over the number 1 episode of all time, according to DWM in 2014.
I mean, Day of the Doctor's very good, isn't it? It's got Matt Smith being Matt Smith, and he's wonderful, and David Tennant's really good as well. But it hasn't got Pat Troughton and Wendy Padbury and Fraser Hines doing what they do best, which is larking about and having fun.
And I was wrong. Dominators is not 227. That lofty perch goes to the Curse of the Black Spot. Dominators is, in fact, in the 2014 survey at number 234, 8 from the bottom.
Yeah, again, that's probably upside down. I'll bring that up with them as well, don't worry.
Question 7, ... Would you rather watch any Jodie Whittaker episode or The Dominators?
Well, there is quite a lot of Jodie Whittaker episodes I enjoy. I mean, something like Power of the Doctor would be a hard choice, I suppose, because that is a phenomenally good episode. But yeah, it's probably going to be the Dominators ultimately.
So Dominators has officially won. It's gotten 7 out of 10, and we've only asked 7 questions. But for the sake of fun, we're going to keep going until the very end. Question 8. Would you rather ... watch Meglos or the Dominators?
Oh, that is tricky, because Meglos is a lot of fun, isn't it? And
I am Meglos, lost Sulphurforen.
It's a lot of something.
Yeah, I mean, can I really cast aside my title as pro Meglos Twitter troll? Yes, I can. Let's watch the Dominators.
The Dominators is 8 for 8. We only have 2 questions to go. Is anything extant out there that can break the Dominator streak? Would you rather watch Citizen Kane, often described as the greatest movie of all time, or The Dominators?
The Dominators. I mean, we all know it's the Sledge.
If one of the Quarks had been named Rosebud, that might have put a very different handle on proceedings.
Yep.
Question 10. Would you rather listen to the Doctor Who Literature podcast or watch The Dominators?
Thankfully, I can do both. I can listen to us talk about the Dominators while I watch the Dominators, so I don't even have to pick with that one.
All right, so I'm not going to give that one to the Dominators, but the final score is Dominators 9, good taste, decency, common sense, and friendship at 1. Dominators is clearly the dominator in the category.
Absolutely. That was a fun game. I enjoyed that one. We'll have to do it again next time.
Next time, I think you're going to be on for a story that I like slightly more, so there's not going to be much impetus to play. You do go by Twitter, or as it's called X now for some reason, as Champion of the Damned. What are some other stories that are universally derided, which are your personal favorites that you would pick over Pyramids of Mars, or Day of the Doctor, or Meglos?
Well, Meglos is one of them. I've always had a soft spot for Meglos just because of how daft and fun and entertaining it is. We've already talked about Creature from the Pit on this very podcast. You can put the Horns of Naimon in there as well. It's just fun, entertaining. Doctor Who. I don't think Doctor Who always has to be as serious and poor-faced as Eric Saywood would like it to be. I think there's a lot of room for just having something that you can sit and enjoy, maybe even as background noise. Just put on a story and while you're maybe doing something else, just to enjoy. I think Space Museum is one I've always championed as much as possible as well. In that DWM poll that I mentioned, we know it was upside down because the Web Planet came last for the first Doctor poll. So again, they'd got that upside down. It's both that go upside down because Web Planet is another really excellent story that I like to champion. I think that's about it. I think most people kind of agree with us on everything else being really good. It's only sort of the outliers like yourself who don't seem to like the Dominators for some bizarre reason.
Well, it was 234 out of 241 in the year 2014, but I did not vote in that survey because I wasn't aware of it and I wasn't a subscriber. Had I voted in that survey, Dominators might have been kicking in at 239 or 240. Who knows?
As high as that?
Oh my goodness. Well, if we're talking about the problem with the current DWM survey is that they only go doctor by doctor and not from the entire era start to finish. So you can't really do this cross-judging of stories anymore. But just counting backwards from 241, Twin Dilemma is considered the worst of all time. I think Dominators is better than that because there are some scenes in the Dominators in isolation that are really funny, like the scene where the Doctor and Jamie are being tested by the Dominators and the Doctor plays
Brilliant.
stupid. That's a classic scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are a couple of other isolated 60-second clips that you could pull out of Dominators that I enjoy. Second from the bottom is Fear Her. I've heard a really good defense of Fear Her from Keir Hansen of the Gallifrey's Public Radio podcast. He and I were on the same Defending the Indefensible panel at Long Island Who a few years ago, and he gave a really good defense of Fear Her. I just don't think Fear Her works as written, produced, and acted. I would probably take the Dominators over Fear Her because Fear Her doesn't really have anything fun in it. And then that whole ending with the Olympics and the Doctor carrying the torch is a little too precious for me. So I definitely have the Dominators above. Third from the bottom is Time and the Ronnie. I think Dominators is a clear winner there. Time Lash. I've hate watched Time Lash several times and I enjoy bits of it. I would have that pretty much on an even keel with Dominators. So now you're talking, if Time Lash is 238, that puts Dominators at 237 or 238. Several other stories on this list are stories that you have chosen for Doctor Who literature because Time Flight is fifth from the bottom at 237. Underworld is sixth from the bottom at 236. And then Space Pirates is at 235. Space Pirates was adjudged worse than Dominators. I think Space Pirates is better because even though it's not Robert Holmes having found his voice yet, it still is Robert Holmes, and it is a comedy more than anything else. It's a comedy that's hiding as a slow-moving, poorly paced space opera, but it is a comedy. So I think Dominators is probably about fifth from the bottom rather than eighth, but it's definitely not the worst of all time.
I thought you were going to say the Space Pirates is better than Dominators there because you can't see the Space Pirates. Thought that's where you were going.
I think Space Pirates works better with the visuals if you had them because so much of part 2 is just endless model shots and the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe are barely in it.
Yeah.
At least in parts 3, 4, and 5, they have a key part in the narrative, so there are fewer model shots of boxes slowly flying through space in formation.
Jumping ahead a year or two for you as well, the novelization's really good.
Of Space Pirates?
Yeah.
It is, but I want to talk about how good the novelization of Dominators is, but before that, let's give you your origin story. When would you have first seen Dominators? I know for me, it was early 1986 when we first got the Hartnell Troughton package on PBS in the States. there were 17 Hartnells and 5 Troughtons. Dominators would have been the first Troughton they showed. That's probably January 1986, and I fell asleep within about 30 minutes, and it was years before I ever made it to the end of the story. When would you have first seen Dominators, and did you fall asleep like young Jason on the very first try?
Well, I can only assume that young Jason had to sleep off the anaesthetic for whatever procedure he was having. But the introduction for me would have been around sort of 1992 or 1993, when I started collecting VHS Doctor Who stories. I think the first Troughton I saw properly was The Mind Robber, when that was repeated on the BBC in 1992. And not long after that, I think I went out and got the next Troughton that was available. And, bearing in mind in 1992, we had a lot less stories available to us at the time, and the vast majority were from season 6. So rather than going out and buying the one that I've already watched, I bought another one, which is coincidentally the one before it. So got the Dominators, and no, there was no feeling of boredom or anything with me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Devoured it as much as I would devour any other, Doctor Who I was being introduced to at that time, and thoroughly enjoyed it for what it is, just a rip roaring, throwback to sort of 1930s style sci-fi of like Buck Rogers with flying saucers and cities of chrome with spires and all that sort of stuff, and obviously the robots and everything else. So yeah, it was, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Came onto Twitter, as I'm still going to call it, no matter what Mr. Musk wants me to do. Came onto Twitter in later years, when, found out there was such a thing as Doctor Who fandom on Twitter, which I could easily access, and then found out for some reason this story that I've, loved and enjoyed from my childhood is thought of as being a bit of a duffer. And we've kind of took it from there, really, and, started a little crusade to try and make people understand why it's not nearly as bad as you think it is.
When would you have first read the Ian Marter novelization? I would have first gotten the novelization probably in 1986 or 1987. I know it was not one of the first ones that I bought. It's not the greatest novelization of all time, but for me, the novelization is one of the best at improving what happens on television because of Marter's particular writing style, and because he is able to up the budget and improve on some of the effects that Morris Barry would have struggled with on TV. When did you first get the novelization, and what does it do for you as opposed to what the TV story does for you?
Well, I got it specifically for this podcast when I knew that I was the one that was lucky enough to be picked for the apex of your Doctor Who themed Dominators themed podcast. Rushed out and bought the double bill, which is
oh my goodness,
the Dominators
wow.
and the Crotons in a shiny silver cover,
because they both feature silver robots.
Yeah. Peas in a pod, Quarks and Crotons. So yeah, it's a really relatively recent purchase. I think, what does it add? I think it's the sauce on your steak, basically. You get a good fine bit of steak and you can enjoy that perfectly well by itself with just a little bit of seasoning, but you add a nice sauce on top of it, then it lifts it a little bit more, doesn't it? So I think that's what Ian Marter does with this book. Like you say, he's got infinite budget, so there's a lot more quarks going on. He's got a way of getting you into that world, doesn't he? He's an author like Terrance Dicks, for example, is very much, this is what's happening, I'm going to show you, tell you what's happening, and this is what's happening in this character, and so on and so forth. Ian Marter wants you to be in that moment. He wants you to be in that survey module, for example, when it is getting blasted by quarks and rolled down a hill, and Zoe and Cully are inside. He wants you to be there as well. That's what he really adds. He adds stuff that not just budget wouldn't allow, but the time wouldn't allow of when this is going out. So the Dominators themselves are a lot more violent, especially Toba. That sadistic side of Toba comes out a lot more in the book. He has there's one scene where Teal, the Dulcian, gets crushed by a quark, and you hear a dull snap, and you're wondering what's that quark broke? Is it snapped his spine, or it's really quite grim in that part. He kind of really puts poor Barlin through the mill, and he's a broken man at the end, even before he's vaporized by the quark. So it's a lot more adult themed in that respect than what you would actually be able to show at 5:15 on a Saturday afternoon just after the sports result on BBC. So ultimately it's not like he's taken the novel and he is polishing a turd, for want of a better phrase. He is actually taking something decent. He's just rolling it in glitter and making it sparkle a little bit more.
That's a good way of putting it. I'll be talking about this more in the audio essay that follows, but just to give you a sneak preview, Ian Marter is given either the rehearsal scripts or the camera scripts or the transmission scripts, whatever he's given. He does not say, all right, I have to stick with what the stage directions tell me. Terrence Dicks will deviate from the stage directions in order to make things more cinematic, and Terrence will always interject with commentary either on how good the plot is or on how stupid the villain is. I think had this book come out in the late 70s and had it been assigned to Terrence Dicks, Terrence probably would have assigned a lot of adjectives to Rhaego and Toba talking about how inept they are. Then you would never have doubted what Terrence really thinks of this story. It would have been about as acerbic as his trashings of Meglos or Arc of Infinity or Android Invasion. 3 books where you read the book and you can tell, gee, Terrence hated this one and is not being shy about his feelings at all. Ian Marter does not editorialize. He never lets you know what he thinks. He just says, all right, I am going to tell this story as if you are there. This is what you see. This is what you hear. This is what you smell. This is how scary it is. Ian Marter does not do lighthearted comedy of manners. So that's really the most unique facet of Ian Marter's writing. He will do it again in Reign of Terror. He will do it again in The Invasion. At this point in the life of the Doctor Who Literature podcast, he has already done it for Ark in Space and Sontaran Experiment and Earthshock. And most notably, he took the witty, civilized comedy of manners that is Rebos Operation and made it really graphic and grim dark. Dominators, I think, works better the way that Ian Marter did it. I would read anything that Terrence Dicks writes, but if Terrence Dicks had written this, it would have been a lot like Meglos or Android Invasion. It's me being much more clever than the narrative, ha ha ha. Marter takes the story at face value, and he just makes it better by giving it a bigger budget and giving it a more visceral feel. So it's not exactly a fun book. It's not something that I read for laughs, but when I want to get in the mood, this book really, really, really fits it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, it's easy to forget that Terrence Dicks did have a hand in writing this story. As Terrence Dicks was coming up as assistant script editor, this is one of the first stories that he actually worked on before going into season 6 properly. How did you describe the story once? You described it as the story that was made at the end of season 5 but broadcast at the start of season 6, just so you could avoid saying the word the Dominators.
That is correct. Season 5, the production block begins with Abominable Snowman, and they have a week off in Wales to go filming, and Patrick Troughton is in a great mood. And then the season ends with what was supposed to be a 6-part story. Part 6 of The Dominators is torn up by Derek Sherwin. I believe Terrence had to rewrite Part 5 to give it a new ending. And then there was literally nothing to air in between Part 5 of this story and Part 1 of the next. So Derek Sherwin writes Part 1 of The Mind Robber on no budget using one standing set and a white backcloth. And part one of The Mind of Evil is transcendently good, even though it's literally a no budget story written on the back of a cocktail napkin from the BBC pub in
Yep.
about 35 minutes before they went into the studios. And that turned Mind Robber from a 4-part story into a 5-part story with 2 different authors. So yeah, Terrence would have done the adaptation. Terrence had also had to rewrite, I think, Seeds of Death.
Yep.
Then you can tell which parts he rewrote because the story picks up the pace noticeably in the back half once he takes over. And of course, Terrence also had to write with Malcolm Hulk all of the war games in
Yep.
about 48 hours. So Terrence is doing a lot of heavy lifting. But yeah, the season ends with Dominators and Mind Robber. So the scripted rerun of Evil of the Daleks after Wheel in Space serves as a bridge between the seasons, but in reality, season 5 ends with the end of Mind Robber, and season 6 begins with The Invasion, which is a much shorter season than before, and again begins with a week of location filming, and puts Patrick Troughton in a good mood. But I think by the end of season 5, he'd already decided to quit. And this story, if you read the Elizabeth Sandifer essay, this is the exact moment where Troughton's face falls, and he says, "I'm out of here." This is the very story.
Yes, I don't know which version she's been watching, but Troughton is superb in this story, as he always is. Any story with these three in, you're going to get, on screen, you're going to get something, magical. So you get that scene you've talked about with the Doctor and Jamie having to fail the mental test. You get the scene with the Doctor and Zoe in the Dominator craft where he's trying to figure out what the plan is and what's powering the ship, and there's a beautiful back and forth between them there. You get Jamie between the Doctor's legs as he's trying to figure out how to crash land the capsule. There's so much of the physicality of Patrick Troughton still going on. There is location footage shooting in this story, and noticeably Patrick Troughton isn't in it. He has, like you say, he's worn out. He's kind of done for. He's pretty much like, actually, can I do this for another year? Well, go on, then I will. But that's it. So he's kind of, already, backing out. Even though it's the production block of season 5, he's backing out and saying, actually, I don't want to be on location. Basically, just put someone in a Beatles wig and get them to run around juggling the egg, and no one will notice.
And by nobody, read everybody.
But obviously, you have that introduction from Terrance Dicks, and he does what Terrance Dicks is particularly adept at, which is padding. He pads very well, Terrance Dicks, and the scenes with the Dominators arguing, bickering backwards and forwards is a very typical Terrance Dicks thing to do, and Ian Marter obviously captures that perfectly in the book as well. There's a lot more arguing between the two Dominators. In fact, if anything, in the book, it's where it starts to become a little bit more repetitive, because you do get to the point in the book where you're thinking, he said, "This is your last chance, Joba," and then he goes off and does it another 3 times, and you're thinking, "Oh, just sack him already, or just listen to him." And but yeah, that's another element of this story that I really enjoyed. Just the fact that we have aliens that don't get on with each other. You don't get this with Daleks or Cybermen or Ice Warriors. They all just fall into line. But it's really refreshing to have depth of character of aliens that actually antagonize each other.
I guess with the Daleks, the only exception to that is there's a terrific scene late in Planet of the Daleks when the Supreme Dalek shows up and destroys one of the underlings for having failed.
Yep.
In real life, I think Probation or Toba would have been fired or executed by part 2 or 3 of the story under any other writer, because how many times is he going to be allowed to fail? And by the end of the story, he literally causes the Dominator's ship to be blown up. Yep. Out of his sheer incompetence. That doesn't make Rego a very good navigator or mentor.
Well, I think it's interesting that he's a navigator. He's not like a general or a leader or anything. It's a navigator, Rago. So I think there is probably he's probably on the lower rungs of the the Dominator hierarchy, whatever that is.
Do we ever see the Dominators again? Are they referenced in any other Big Finish or any of the books? Is there anyone else who said, I want to play on the sandbox that is the universe of the planet Dulcus?
I'm not entirely sure. I know Quarks have come back, but I think it's quite contentious. I don't know if the estate of Henry Lincoln and Mervyn Haseman, who created the Dominators, have allowed anything much to be done. I know it was a real big bone of contention because obviously Norman Ashby's written this. Sitting there in the pub with his mate, Robin Bland and David Agnew.
And don't forget Stephen Harris.
Yep. And the reason being is obviously, as you've mentioned, this was a 6-part story which got cut down to 5 parts. And they were that aghast at that they asked the names to be taken off it. The other falling out they had with production team and the BBC was around the licensing of the Quarks. I think Lincoln and Haseman had the same idea as the BBC, which was this could be something as good as the Daleks. If you start merchandising, if you start making little Daypal figures and start putting it into comics and everything, this could be this could be the next Daleks basically. But the BBC ran with that idea before they'd actually got permission from the writers, and that caused a bit of a argument between the two, so that ended up as pretty much, we'll not use them then. That's fine. If we can't play with them, you can't play with them either. And it kind of, died a death really after sort of the pop up again in the war games. Interestingly, obviously they created Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart as well, and they're quite happy to let him appear in both the invasion and everything afterwards, which we should be really thankful for. They're quite happy just to take a check every time the Brigadier popped up. But yeah, it was a real missed opportunity just through stubbornness, I think, on the part of the BBC and them that, we haven't done this properly, so we're not going to do it at all.
Candy Jar Books has been given the license to write Brigadier Stories pre-unit that is about to finally wrap up after about 10 years of continuous production. I've had 3 Doctor Who literature guests who have written for the Candy Jar Books Lethbridge Stewart series, and I believe that's going to be followed on by a unit series. So the estate of Haseman and Lincoln is doing very well licensing out Lethbridge Stewart. Which begs the question, could there be a series of Candy Jar Books novels featuring the Quarks going throughout history, destroying various things, civilizations?
Quite possibly. I think we'd all love to see that. I think Big Finish have got they did announce, I don't know if it's out or still getting worked on, but they did announce a story with the Quarks in. So I don't know what's happened with that.
That's my real weakness in fandom, other than talking too much on podcasts. I don't know nearly as much Big Finish as I should. I just don't have the ability to buy every single one of their stories. So they will bring back some monster that I love, and I won't find out about it until years later. Like, I didn't find out about a sequel to Seeds of Doom. I didn't find out about a sequel called the Poseidon Adventure, backing up to Android Invasion, for quite a long time. So they could have been doing dozens of stories about the Quarks, and I never would have known about it.
They'd announced a unit box set which was due to be released in March 2022. The Power of the Dominators.
Huh. Did it ever come out?
If you just bear with me while I check the fact machine.
We'll go to the fact machine. All right, we are back from the fact machine, and Frazer has some shocking information for us.
Yeah, so the Power of the Dominators was indeed released by Big Finish in March 2022, so it's out there.
And it's got an all-star cast. It's got Gemma Redgrave, Ingrid Oliver, and Christopher Naylor, who is Big Finish's Harry Sullivan.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's one to go and look into.
In the meantime, we have for you a product placement. We have a review of the new Quark machine. Over to you, Bill.
A review of the new Quark by Bill Evenson. Welcome to Toba the Dominator's blog, posted by Toba, 12:39 p.m. Hello, fellow Quark owners from across the 10 galaxies. Sorry I haven't posted in a while. Things have been crazy around here. After my last entry, our ship had to swerve to avoid a collision with a Dravin ship, and since then, Rago and I have been wearing these awful back braces. Actually, the back brace really isn't that bad. I can still stomp around and shout quite a bit, which I like. Rago seems really crabby about having to wear one, though, and now it seems like all we do is yell at each other. But honestly, I don't know if anything would make that guy happy anymore. People who know me know that I like to have a good time. I really like to destroy things, for instance. But all Rago wants to do is drill, drill, drill. What a bore. To all my friends on Epsilon 4, I can't even guess when we'll arrive. Rago broke away from the fleet yesterday and landed the ship on the dullest planet you've ever seen in your life. We're here on a mission to refuel the fleet. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but it involves drilling. And more drilling. Let's just say a lot of drilling. And, at least according to Rago, not much in the way of destroying. Anyway, without further ado, here's my review of the new Quark, which has a lot of cool new apps. First of all, there's the Destroy app. You have a lot of cool options with Destroy. You can split your destruction into 3 phases by saying target, and then power, and then destroy, which is an intimidating way to interrogate prisoners. I've also found that just saying kill works equally well as destroy, so play around with it, have fun. I did use the Total Destruction app once, but the building I ordered totally destroyed looked pretty much the same afterwards as it had before I ran the app. Still, the building's at least a good 12 feet away from our drilling site, so who cares? Then there's the Molecular Force app, which seems a bit pointless to me. You basically use this for restraint, although supposedly some Quark owners hack theirs to molecular force clothing off of a person. But if you need a Quark for that, I feel sorry for you. Note, molecular force, at least at the low power setting I use, still allows people to talk, and it wears off after a few minutes. Again, I usually just destroy aliens, so I don't see the need for it. Rago loves it, though. The main problem with the Quark is battery life and running multiple apps simultaneously. For my personal tastes, I like to run Destroy at full power. Yes, I know. Imagine that. Toba gives full power to Destroy. Of course, with Destroy running at full power, other apps, like operating the drill, run more slowly, and power tends to drain faster. You may also notice that if you're running Destroy at full power, and if you're destroying lots of things, then the Quark voice comes out in this really high-pitched, broken speech that's incomprehensible. I have my Quarks programmed to say, "Shall we destroy?" whenever they see any aliens, but usually even I can't understand what they're saying. Recharge makes the Quarks flap their arms around a bit, but if you ask me, it actually uses more power than if you just left them alone or had them destroy some aliens. The new Equalize function works pretty well. If one Quark starts to run out of power before another one, you can just tell them to equalize and then their power levels are the same. Of course, you'll need to buy at least 2 Quarks to use it. If you're like me and you like to destroy a lot of things, you'll want to know how easily the Quarks themselves are destroyed. Here, I'm afraid the Quarks come up a bit short. It's actually quite easy to disable a Quark by dropping a rock on it or throwing a bedsheet on it and pushing it over. This is why I like to use the Quarks primarily to destroy everything I come into contact with. If your enemy's destroyed, they certainly can't destroy you or your Quarks, can they? Yeah, just try telling that to Rago. You should have seen Rago just now. He came over and interrupted the drilling to ask how the drilling was going. Brilliant. Then some primitive blew up one of the Quarks, and Rago announced that he's going to destroy the primitives personally. I swear he's just doing it to spite me. Oh, before I go, I should address the concern that some consumers have expressed that the Quarks may become sentient and attempt to conquer the universe. All I can say is, Quarks are robots, not Daleks. Sounds like someone's been reading too many comics. Toba.
So we've talked about the Dominators on television. We've talked about the Dominators, the book. We've talked about Dominators, the Big Finish. What else can we say about this story, Frazer?
It's just good, isn't it? It's great. It's a great story. It just doesn't deserve the reputation that it has. I mean, I can sit here for hours and hours and talk about why I love the Dominators. But I always think now, for me, the interesting question is, why do you not?
Well, I did answer that question a little bit earlier in the hour with my top 10 list about things to quote unquote enjoy about the Dominators. In all seriousness, I think my biggest problems with the Dominators are threefold. Number one, the pacing. I'm never the kind of guy who says a Doctor Who story is 2 episodes too long. I'm aware that these are serials and not individual movies. The way things were made in the 1960s, you didn't have previously on Doctor Who or the Dominators. So you had to apportion a little bit of each episode, restaging scenes from the week before. So in case you missed part one because you were out of the country, you have to have several scenes in part two that recap or duplicate things that were said in part one in order to bring the audience up to speed. So not only do you have the reprise of the previous week, but you also have dialogue that recaps the previous week. If you watch all that as a 100-minute movie, you're going to be seeing the same scene several times over as it's staged and then recapped. So this was never meant to be watched in a single sitting. That's not my problem. My problem is the 25-minute episodes themselves don't really move. I think part of that has to do with this is not Doctor Who's best cast. Ronald Allen is good, but I think he's much better in Ambassadors for reasons that I'll discuss when the Ambassadors episodes come up, and that's going to be a banger, by the way. Love Ambassadors of Death.
Who doesn't?
So the individual episodes, 25, even at 25 minutes long, for me, they still overstay their welcome. Secondly, it's the script. I don't mind plot holes. I don't mind inept aliens. I happen to like Space Museum. I think it's a very clever script with some really laugh out loud funny moments.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Space Museum should be much higher up than bottom 5 of all time. I would put it well above Dominators, for example. But it's just the idea that Rego and Toba are constantly fighting for all 5 weeks, and Rego never does anything about it. So when I watch a story, I'm like, guys, shut up. Stop punishing each other and just start conquering. And the biggest problem that I have is the point that Elizabeth Sandifer makes in the original TARDIS Eruditorum essay. I have the Second Doctor volume, so I'm going off of that. This story is so regressive and culturally right wing. And to be anti pacifist in 1968, 1969 is to be establishment, pro Vietnam War, anti hippie. And Sandifer writes, this makes you reevaluate everything that you thought was good about the Abominable Snowmen. And fair enough, when I went back and I watched the Abominable Snowmen as part of my pilgrimage in 2021, that was the story that suffered the most in my estimation. I had always loved the Abominable Snowmen, primarily because of the Terrence Dicks novelization. But when you watch, and I'm not talking about the animated version, which does some of the things to alleviate the whitewashing cast. And when you watch the reconstruction of Abominable Snowman, it really is these two guys hating on Tibetan culture, and all of the monks are antagonists and heels. And you realize that Abominable Snowman is not nearly as enlightened as I thought it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I thought it was a sensitive exploration of Tibetan culture and Buddhism. It is not. It is a harsh, savage hack job. And that's basically what the Dominators is to hippie culture. Oh, all pacifists are stupid and deserve to die. So I think the story is not coming from a good place. That being said, yes, you are right. The cast of Troughton and Wendy Padbury and Frazer Hines are gold together. And there are scenes with the Doctor and Jamie and scenes with the Doctor and Zoe that are just, again, in isolation, taking everything else out. These are laugh out loud scenes because the three of them improve anything that they are in because they knew how to act for television in the 1960s. They know how to capture the eye. They know how to do physical comedy. It's not just that they get witty dialogue. It's that they are a very good team together. And because the story survives as full video and not just audio, you get the benefit of all that physical comedy at which Patrick Troughton excelled. So if there are good things about the story, it's the fact that these three performers are in it, not so much the underlying story or script itself. So that's my big take on the Dominators.
Yeah, I think in terms of the hatchet job on the hippie culture, I think that's potentially what Haseman and Lincoln were aiming for. But I think Sherwin and Dix kind of in the wash a lot of that out. To be honest, I don't think that comes across, particularly well. I think they aim a little bit better with the Dulcian Society and make it a bit more interesting and in depth. In terms of the pacing, I think you're absolutely right on that. I think what shows in this is that this is a 6-part story that got cut down to 5 parts at part 4. If Derek Sherwin had got the full script and realised from day one this wasn't going to work, and moved things around a little bit better, we wouldn't have everything happening in episode 5. Literally everything happens in episode 5, and I think that's where the pacing issues come in. For the rest of it, what I'm going to say is you are 100% right when you say you don't like this. You're 100% right. Just as I am 100% right when I say I like this, I love this story, and it's excellent, because it's opinions at the end of the day. And I think what we've shown this evening is, we can come at the story with 2 completely different opinions, and we can have a very good discussion about those opinions where we respect each other and come out, if not in total agreement, then at least understanding where the other person comes from. And I think that's the most important thing we can do with this story is, have that hearty discussion about it and get where the other person's coming from.
And that is one of the darker sides of fandom. It's this notion of toxic positivity. If I like it, you are wrong for not liking it, and I am going to attack you for not liking what I like. That can make Twitter an uncomfortable place at times. It's not quite as bad as the toxic negativity of the not my doctor crowd, but it is something to watch out for.
It's an aspect, and I will 100% throw my hands up and say I've done that. If you, I make it a running joke that if you say something bad about the Dominators, I'll give you a week before I crawl out your television backwards and give you a 5-hour TED talk on why it's fantastic. So I'm as guilty as anyone else of saying, if you say you don't like something, I will come for you, and I have to pull myself back at times and say, look, you're within your right not to like this. You've got an opinion just as much as I have, and if you don't like it, awesome, let's have a chat about it, but let's not go to the ends of the earth and the extremes of the way that some people do.
And if you look at the DWM survey, there are probably more folks in my camp than in yours, but at the end of the day, you enjoy watching the story. You have limited free time, you have a career, you're married, you have children, you have several podcasts that you're on. You don't have 24 hours of leisure time in a day. If watching the Dominators is what gives you a pickup, that's a wonderful thing. And for me, I have done hate watches of the Dominators. It's not a story that I would voluntarily watch more than once every 5 years, but talking about it and reading the book and having this conversation is a great experience. And I'll say, if I were to play Would You Rather, I would rather talk about the Dominators with you than watch the episode.
There we go.
Frazer, where else can we find you in the world of Doctor Who podcasting these days?
The usual places. You'll find me on the Trap One podcast. I'm part of the Once in Future team, so I've been working through Big Finish. Just like you, I'm not a big Finish aficionado, so it's been really good to get into Big Finish through the 60th anniversary Once in Future set. So you'll find me every month popping up on that, as well as the usual novel reviews and such like. You'll also find me lurking around in the dark corners of A Hamster with a Blunt Penknife with my good friends Simon Hart and Joe Ford. Various other places I'll keep cropping up, because basically I'll go where anyone wants us to.
You and I have, as of earlier today, recorded an upcoming episode of Trap One covering a Doctor Who novelization. That episode has already come out by the time this Doctor Who literature airs. That was the Trap One discussion panel on Doctor Who Kerblam by Pete McTighe. and I'm sure I will be seeing you on lots more Trap
Kablam!
Ones in the future because Trap One has a very big year planned for us. I have you booked for 2 more upcoming Doctor Who literature episodes. The next year of this podcast is pretty much booked, and I am not taking any new bookings for the time being because I have very few open slots left and I have to guard those carefully. But I can confirm that you are going to be on the show twice more in the coming months.
Yep.
Perhaps you'll be talking about Patrick Troughton again. Who's to say? Time will tell. It always does.
It certainly does. Once again, thank you very much for having us on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Command accepted. Doctor Who, The Dominators, by Ian Marter, televised as The Dominators, teleplay by Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln, screen credit to Norman Ashby, televised in August and September 1968, paperback release date July 19, 1984, target book number 86, cover artist Andrew Skilleter. The Doctor remembers Dulcus from a previous visit as a civilized and peaceful place, but times have changed, and his second trip is not quite the holiday he was expecting. The Dulcians themselves are more reluctant than ever before to engage in acts of violence. The so-called Island of Death, once used as an atomic test site, has served as a dire warning to generations of Dulcians of the horrifying consequences of warfare. But an alien race prepares to take advantage of their pacifism. The whole planet and its passive inhabitants are threatened with complete annihilation, and no one, it seems, is going to lift a finger to stop the evil Dominators and their unquestioning robot slaves. My audio essays on Doctor Who literature tend to fall into 2 camps. One, for books that I already reviewed for the ratings guide, I take my original review, clean it up, and add some detail or reflect any evolution in my opinion about a given TV serial or novelization over the years. You'll see that coming up in my eventual review of Frontios, where my original review of the TV serial was negative, but come to find out I have not felt negative about Frontios on TV in years. Those kind of reviews tend to last for about 15 minutes or so. In the other camp, for books that I have not formally reviewed before, I'll read through the book right here in front of my computer, flipping back and forth to the online episode transcript so that I can track changes between TV and print, and write a full essay about the two. Those essays usually take about 30 minutes to play. This essay will be of the former kind. I last read the Dominators novelization about 10 years ago. At the time, I was still living in Brooklyn, as I am now, but was working in New Jersey. That was a long commute. So the Target PDFs on my Kindle were my constant companion for that 4-train ride journey. At the time, I was selecting Target books to read in random order, going by random number generator. I do recall that Snake Dance and Time Lash were the first 2 books that I picked at the end of the year 2010. And then the random number generator gave me every season 8 novelization at about a 6-week stretch, so much for random. Separate accidents broke my original Kindle device in the middle of The Demons, August or September 2011, and then I broke my replacement Kindle device in the middle of The Ark in Space. That accident involved a collision between me and a train, with my left elbow breaking a few milliseconds before The Ark in Space broke my Kindle. That was May 2013, and I stopped my Target reread on Kindle after that. I figured that to break 2 Kindles while reading is misfortune, but to break a 3rd would be carelessness. Now, I had finished The Dominators on my Kindle a few weeks before that train accident, and I submitted my review to the ratings guide, which was posted in April 2013. At the time of posting, there was only one other review of the Dominators novelization, and that had gone up in 2007, a review titled, quote, "Good Book, Bad Story." Much of the original version of this review was a line-by-line refutation of that earlier ratings guide review, and I titled my review, quote, "Great Book, Bad Story," emphasis in original. I have no real wish to name and shame the author of that earlier review. 2007 feels prehistoric now. I was still living in Los Angeles at the time. Well, Diamond Bar, not downtown Los Angeles. And I was working in San Bernardino. Now that was a good job. I had my own parking spot at the San Bernardino job. Except for the one day that I got to work and there was a literal deflated tumbleweed parked in my spot, which to this day I am convinced was a practical joke pulled by one of my then employees. My kid wasn't even born in 2007. Russell T. Davies was Doctor Who's showrunner back then in that prehistoric age, and the Doctor was David Tennant. Oh. Wait, okay, I guess 2007 wasn't that long ago. But the point is, I am no longer interested in a line-by-line refutation of a 16-year-old review. It is most likely the original author of that other review barely even remembers writing it, or that if they were to pick up the novelization and reread it today, they would most likely have a different opinion. So I edited my 2013 Ratings Guide review, mostly to point out what I really like about Ian Marter's novelization of The Dominators. I do still refute the point that the other reviewer made about the book being indistinguishable from the prose of Terrance Dicks. Well, because this is a literature podcast, and I did practice law for the better part of a lifetime, so distinguishing is what I do. So, I don't need to tell you that The Dominators on TV is god-awful. Now, Frazer, of course, disagrees, but right now, I'm on the mic. Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln submitted a 6-part script so reactionary that, as Elizabeth Sandifer had said on TARDIS Eruditorum, it makes you question everything you thought was good and progressive about the abominable snowmen. The production team famously cut out the final episode of The Dominators, and nobody ever noticed that 17% of the story got jettisoned in the process. Haseman and Lincoln were so enraged by this that they insisted their names be removed and replaced by the bland pseudonym Norman Ashby. Yes, that's why they wanted their names off the story, not because it was terrible, horrible, no good, but because the production team couldn't appreciate its nuances and length. Seriously. Maybe we are lucky that they never wrote for the series again after this. The best thing about the Dominators is that the 3 disposable characters in Episode 1 are named after the Arabic words for 1, 2, and 3. That's it. And those characters die in the first 5 minutes. The rest of it is darn near unwatchable. What Martyr gives us in Doctor Who and the Dominators instead is what the story would have looked like if it was directed by Douglas Camfield or David Maloney or Derek Martinez, and if it was shot in color, and not an end-of-production Season 5 budget as was The Dominators. Martyr writes this thing as if he had Disney money to spend. He uses the basic literary devices of the 5 senses to engage us in the planet Dulcus, which, trust me, if you've watched The Dominators on TV, you really wouldn't think was worth doing. As Martyr writes it, and this is very distinguishable from the prose of Terrance Dicks, the Dominators have flinty emerald eyes. The Quark's probes glow crimson, blood red, incandescent. The atmosphere inside the one fallout shelter on Dulcus is fetid. Ronald Allen's, quote, red-rimmed eyes lit up with a hypnotic gleam which seemed to be fired by hate and greed and lust and madness all together. Now that is almost certainly not how director Maurice Barry asked him to play it. And then there's the violence. This is not what Terrance Dicks' prose looks like. Terrance's hallmark is irony, sardonic tone. He comments on the story as he goes, mocking the villain's thought processes if the story is a good one, or mocking the story's internal logic if it's a bad one. Terrance makes things look a little more scenic, and he relies heavily on the original scripts rather than the slash-for-budget final versions, but he doesn't relay the world through the 5 senses, and he certainly doesn't do violence like Martyr does. Wahid, Etnan, and Tolata, or if you will, 1, 2, and 3, were flung into the air like helpless puppets before collapsing in shapeless broken bundles in the sand. When Zoe is afraid of being shot, she, quote, expected the Quark's glowing probes to discharge their murderous ultrasonic quanta and to smash her body to fragments. When on TV, the Doctor is comically zapped by the Dominators during an intelligence test, which he fails. Martyr decides to tell us what would have really happened. Quote, his swollen tongue trapped between gnashing teeth, and his eyes crossing and bulging horribly in his lolling head. That, folks, is what Ian Martyr does to comedy. Lastly, Martyr certainly does deviate from the TV script, and in ways that make the story a tiny bit more gripping and atmospheric. He extends scenes to add tension and drama that certainly Haseman and Lincoln wouldn't have known how to give us. The comic bit of business in episode 2 about Cully and Zoe taking a travel capsule across Dulcus becomes a stomach-churning, high-impact thrill ride in the book. In episode 5 on TV, it takes Cully and Jamie about 6 seconds to outrun a single quark, but in the book they have to escape several phalanxes of quarks. Phalanxes! On TV, in that same episode, it's implied the characters dig a tunnel to steal the Dominator's radioactive seed capsule. But in the book, Martyr takes us inside that cramped tunnel to dig out every particle of Earth. If you thought Charles Bronson's Danny had it bad in The Great Escape, Martyr thinks he had it too easy and makes the digging even more claustrophobic. Best of all, Martyr has restaged the controversial Episode 1 cliffhanger, so we get the quarks described very early on in the book, and they never ask, "Shall we destroy?" In fact, Martyr even comments on the quark voices by describing them as, quote, demented giggling. So the Dominators will never be a good story, and you will note that I have not added an audio clip from the episode for this essay. The book can at times be a chore to read because the source material is piggish, regressive, and repetitive, but Martyr works just about as hard as a writer can possibly work to make the Dominator something else, visceral and terrifying. Next time on Doctor Who Literature, if you thought the Dominators had a bad reputation, well, to quote Al Jolson in The Jazz Singer, or to quote Sylvester McCoy in The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, quoting Al Jolson in The Jazz Singer, you ain't seen nothing yet. Next week, we are discussing possibly the most 1980s-looking Doctor Who story of all time. It has everything. It has Cold War drama. It has a range of accents. It has the most famous roundhouse kick in the history of the BBC. It has a pantomime horse masquerading as a dinosaur. It has another actor from The Great Escape. It is, of course, Doctor Who, Warriors of the Deep. Next time on Doctor Who Literature. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. This podcast is produced by David Barsky, Jim Sangster, and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Frazer Gregory. Frazer did a great job going 15 rounds with me on the story. Special thanks as well to Stacy Smith, Bill Evenson, and Arnold from ATB Publishing for kind permission to feature an audio adaptation of Bill's essay from the original 2012 Outside In volume. And thanks to Stacy and Bill and Pencil Tip Publishing for the excerpt of Stacy Smith reading from Look at the Size of That Thing. This podcast can be found on most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's DrWho Novels, on Mastodon at drwhonovels at mastodon.social, and on email at drwholiterature, that's drwholiterature at gmail.com. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.